Hello, dear friends. I would like to give some final remarks on the book of Shmot, the book of Exodus, before I continue on to Vayikra, Leviticus. Nachmanides Ramban refers to the book of Shmot as Sefer HaGeula, the book of redemption. What does that mean? Well, when you say the name Exodus, you think, of course, of leaving Egypt. When you think of redemption, you think that there is a leaving Egypt, and there is, of course, then goals and targets after that. And you could look at the structure of the book that way. So it's not just the redemption from Egypt, which is, of course, part one and a significant portion of the book. But after leaving Egypt, you have two, if you want, stations. Station number one is Sinai. God says to Moses, when you leave Egypt, you're going to serve the Lord on this mountain. And then the second, and so this first station is the station of the Decalogue, the revelation at Sinai, which we call the giving of the Torah. By the way, that's an interesting point. We even have a festival called Shavuot, translated as Pentecost, which we call the festival of the giving of the Torah. It's really the festival commemorating when God spoke the Ten Commandments, the Decalogue, to the people of Israel. If anything, according to our tradition, the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, the Pentateuch, was given later on in the desert. There's a controversy in the Talmud and Gittin concerning this, whether it was given at the end of the 40 years or piece by piece, until the end of the 40 years, but by the end of the 40 years, all the 5 books of Moses are given to the people of Israel, as it says, Lakoach et Sefer HaTorah zeh, take this book of the Torah, it says in Deuteronomy. So this first station is Sinai, which represents the giving of the Torah. And then the second station is the Mishkan, the building of the tabernacle, the sanctuary, which represents futuristically the temple. And this is not only the Torah as an instruction to the people, but then this connection, direct connection to God, as I explained in previous videos. So this second part then, the second tachana, the second station, is then this connection between God and Israel, as it says in Isaiah. Kisei kevod makom merishon makom mikdashenu. Kisei kevod marom merishon makom mikdashenu. Which means the glorious throne, or the honorary throne of the transcendental one, is the place of our temple. So this is the connection then, or as we said before, it says, they should build for me a sanctuary, and I will dwell in their midst. So these are the two parts to it. Now there is a Mishnah brought at the end of Ta'anit, which also mentions this idea. On the verse in Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, the verse says, Tzena orena b'not Zion, go out and look, O daughters of Zion, Ba'melech Shlomo, at King Solomon, Be'atara she'itra lo imo, at the crown that his mother has crowned him with, B'yom chatunato, on the day of his wedding, U'b'yom simchat libo, and the day of his gladness, the gladness of his heart. And then the Mishnah comments on this metaphoric verse in the book of Song of Songs, which we consider in general a metaphor. B'yom chatunato, the day of his wedding, zu matan Torah, this is the giving of the Torah. B'yom simchat libo, the day of the gladness of his heart, zo beit hamikdash, that is the temple. In other words, the Mishnah says that the meaning of the metaphor, the day of his wedding, is called Sinai, sort of the wedding between God and the Jewish people. And the day of the gladness of his heart is the building of the temple. Now, the commentaries point out that both these things you can attribute to the day of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, because Moses, if you remember, there's the Decalogue, then Moses brings down the first tablets, and then he breaks the first tablets when he sees the people dancing around the golden calf, and then he goes up again for 40 days and 40 nights. And according to Rashi, a second time too, comes back on Yom Kippur, twice 40 days after that, and on Yom Kippur he comes back with the second luchot, the second tablets, which God said that he should engrave and give to the people. So Yom Kippur becomes the day of the giving of the tablets in the sense of the second tablets, the second giving of the Torah in a sense. The first temple, built by Solomon, was also completed on Yom Kippurim. In fact, the Talmud goes on to say that how is it was completed on Yom Kippur and they were having festivities? Talmud says actually they forgot to fast on Yom Kippur that year, and then they had more jubilation right into the festival of Sukkot, which they did keep. And God forgave them for forgetting that because they were so involved in the gladness of keeping the commandment, the mitzvah, building the temple. But both these are associated with Yom Kippur, the giving of the second tablets and the building of the temple. And both of these, the Mishnah associates with that verse in the Songs of Songs. So there's these two stations. One's called the giving of the Torah, and the other one's called the building of the temple. These are two stations within the redemption of Israel. We come out of Egypt, out of enslavement, we gain an identity through Moses, and we stand there at Sinai to teach us what it means to be the people of Israel. And when we are able to internalize that message, we become the nation of Israel. So the giving of the Torah is to build us up as a people. The second stage, which is called building the temple, which of course was the tabernacle in the book of Shmot, but we're now looking at futuristically, because I said, according to Nachmanides, he says in general, Maseh Avot Siman Lebanim, that whatever it says in the Torah, the stories of the Torah, whether Exodus or Genesis, is a sign for later generations. So that the futuristic idea of building the temple, which also represents the Messianic age, is not only for the Jewish people, but is a universal concept. In what sense? The Torah was given only to the Jewish people, the 5 books of Moses. The commandments were given to the Jews. In fact, from a Jewish point of view, the nations of the world, children of Noah, there are special 7 commandments, which are the basis of morality, but they don't have to do all the things that Jews have to do. In general, from a Jewish point of view, we don't believe in missionizing either. We believe that every nation basically is in the image of God. Every human being is in the image of God. And then everybody has their role to play. The Torah calls the Jews Mamlechet Kohanim, Goy Kadosh, a nation of priests and a holy nation. Now, if you have a nation of priests, that means that there is a relationship between the nation of the priests and everybody else. But there's got to be an everybody else, or how can you be a nation of priests? So it's sort of like the Jewish people are the maestro, and every nation has its music to be played. And it's just coordinating the music between the various nations. This is called the temple. And we very much believe that the temple represents a point that after the Jewish people, I call it, get their act together and understand how to internalize the Torah properly, then we will have a message to mankind too. And this message, of course, will be an ethical message of meaning of human life that we've discovered and we now want to share with the rest of the world. That's called the temple. As Isaiah says, Ki beiti beit tefillah yikarei lechol ha'amim. My nation, my temple, my house is a house of prayer for all nations. And King Solomon, when he built the temple, he says, and even the foreigner who comes from far away will come to this house and call out to you, God. And the Mishnah in Zevachim actually has a list of which offerings the non-Jew brings when they come to the temple. Even though today we don't have the sacrificial service and we have a problem with it, but the temple we can build as an edifice. And But this would be then a center. It represents the central message of the connection between the Jewish people and the nations. So, in a sense, if this represents the concept of redemption, so as I said, we have two stages. One is leaving servitude. And as we know, the Jews also were enslaved 4 times, in a sense, because we had 4 exiles. That's our tradition of the 4 exiles, the Babylonian, well, after leaving Egypt, the Babylonian exile, and the Persian exile, and the Greek exile, and the Roman exile. And some people put the Greeks and the Romans together and talk about the exile in Ishmael, according to the Ibn Ezra. But basically, we talk about 4 exiles. And eventually, we leave these 4 exiles, and we come back to the land of Israel, as it says in Deuteronomy, Devarim, chapter 30. If your scattered ones shall be at the corners of the earth, from there will God and gather you, and he shall take you. And your Lord your God shall bring you to the land, which was inherited by your ancestors. So, in this messianic concept, you have this idea futuristically of the Jews coming back to the land. But I want to explain it a little bit, because in general, the idea is, as I said, part 1 is the Jews receive the Torah in order to explain to them what they're supposed to do as individuals and as a collective, as a group. When we get that together and we're able to manage it properly, then eventually these exiles will be over and we will come back to the land of Israel and set ourselves up as a nation again, which of course is the goal, not to remain in the exile, as the Maharal of Prague says. But this goal, which is represented by the temple, really entails various things. And its goal is for the nationhood to build it up as itself and to be a beacon of light to the rest of the world. And I want to explain just a little bit about that. Maimonides has a very interesting description of the Messianic age, what he writes as a young man in his commentary to the Mishnah, in his introduction to the chapter Chelek. And I talk about this in my book, Jewish Faith in a Changing World, which you can find on Amazon. And he says a few interesting things about his concept of what he thinks the Messianic age is, and I think it's very interesting to understand. And the first thing he says is like this. He quotes the Talmud in Megillah, the words of Shmuel, Ein ben olam hazeh liyamot haMashiach, ela shi'abud malchiot bilvad. There is no difference, he says, between the world that we know now and the Messianic age, except that there will be world peace, which means the Jews won't be subjugated anymore to other sovereignties. They'll be able to be by themselves, meaning in their own country, sovereign, and there will be world peace. As Isaiah says, Lo yisai goy el goy chereb, lo yamedu milchama. Nation shall not raise sword against nation, nor will they learn war anymore. And Micah says this too. So you have this concept of world peace. And according to Maimonides, there's also a political leader, which he refers to as the Messianic King. Of course, he uses the term monarchy because that's what he was familiar with in those days, and this is a term used in the prophets too. But there will be a leader, but he says the leader will be a regular human, not somebody who's going to do miracles. But this person will be able to not only get the people together, but get the nations together. And nations understanding that this person wants the good of humanity, they'll start following because they'll say, well, this guy's got a point. And all the good nations will get together with him. And if there are those who oppose, together they will make sure the opponents don't rise up against them. But he says humanity won't change in any way miraculously. There still will be rich and poor. Society will run more or less the same way. But what will the differences be, according to Maimonides? He says, for the Jewish people, the difference will be that they'll be in their land, they'll have leadership, they'll have security, prosperity, and time to understand the Torah and make meaningful lives. But this will spread to the whole world. This will bring world peace to the whole world, he says. That wars will stop, as it says in the prophets. And this is a major goal, he says. It's not that the world will change. He says the world will become normal. And he says another interesting point, which exactly connects with this. Maimonides in the same place says, and another place too actually he says it in the Guide for the Perplexed. He claims the world will never stop. As it says in Ecclesiastes, Kohelet, Haaretz Lolam Omedet, which means the earth is always there. He says, yes, we believe that the world was created at a certain point, but there's no reason to think that the world will stop. Contrary, let's say, to the Book of Jubilees. So, according to Maimonides, then, if the world started at a certain point, but will never stop, and is eternal in that sense, on the number line, that means that any place that the Messianic era starts on this line is as far away from the end as the beginning, because on an infinite number line, any point on that number line is far away from infinity as the beginning. So at any point where the Messianic era begins, that's not the end of the world, that is the beginning of the world. But it's the beginning of a normal world. Unfortunately, dear friends, we are living in prehistorical times. We have gotten used to a world where when nations don't get along with each other, so they attack, kill people, destroy, and then whoever wins, solve the problem, right? Not good. That's not the way humanity is supposed to work. And unfortunately, on every day on this planet, somebody is fighting somewhere. There's some war going on somewhere. Every day of our lives, somewhere on the planet. Unfortunately, at every moment, somebody's killing somebody, somebody's raping somebody, somebody's stealing from somebody. I used to joke around, and people would say, well, do you think there are aliens out there? And I would say, if there are aliens out there, I can tell you where they're not going to go. They're not going to come here because all they have to do is look at their television sets and what's going on here and say, whoa, I wouldn't want to visit that planet. These guys are really dangerous. They're killing each other all the time. And when they're not killing each other, they're polluting each other. When they're not polluting each other, they're doing whatever, eating junk food in order to get diabetes and high blood pressure. I mean, we are doing things to destroy ourselves despite all the progress that we've had as humanity. That's not normal. Maimonides says the Messianic era, the way he understands it, is the Jewish concept, is when the world decides to become normal. And once the world decides to become normal and everybody realizes it's actually possible, people won't want to change that anymore. Today, we're so used to the fact there are parks we can't go into, there are neighborhoods we can't enter, they're too dangerous, there are streets you can't go on at night, it's too dangerous. There are countries you can't go to because who knows what's going to happen. That's the way we live our lives. That's not normal. We should expect more from mankind. So for Maimonides, that is the point of the Messianic era. So the Jews really have a central role to play. And in this central role, it's not only understanding our position, but we have a message. Isaiah says, this nation which I have created, designed for me, they shall tell my glory. And it also says, Atem Edainu Hashem, you are my witnesses, says God, and I am God. So we have to bear the testimony, and we have to give the message. And the message is really how to live an ethical and moral life, how to find the significance as being a human being on the human level and on the spiritual level. And this is a message which, first of all, we have to learn to internalize ourselves, because we've gone through exiles and difficulties. And unfortunately, many Jews have fallen on the wayside in the sense of understanding what it means to be a Jew. And secondly, we have a world message when we get our act together, which is symbolized in the Messianic age or the temple, which its main goal is to get not just ourselves established as a community and a country and a sovereignty, but that our neighbors around the world work together and strive for world peace. Unfortunately, we're living in a time right now where we're seeing nation fight against nation. This is not the way things should be. It should be that if nations have problems, to solve their problems, they should discuss. I mean, if there's any point to the UN, that should be the point, right? To be a place where nations can discuss their problems before it gets into combat form, and not just to have a place in Hague where you go after you want to blame somebody. But that should be the goal. That should be the goal of the Security Council. That should be the goal of the whole point of stopping wars before they happen and not waiting to pick up the parts and the mess after everything's happened and to see how it changed the outcome of what's going on in the world. So with this message, I leave you at the end of the book of Shmot, and we will now continue with the book of Vayikra. Shalom, shalom.